Hey guys, tonight we're going to slip quietly back through time, not to the noisy markets or dusty roads you've heard about, but to the long oak tables of the Middle Ages, where the rich sat in high-backed chairs under flickering candlelight, eating things you've probably never tried, and in some cases might not want to. Imagine platters of roasted peacock, with its feathers artfully reattached for display, steaming bowls of almond milk pottage, and goblets of spiced wine so sweet and heavy they'd lull even the most stubborn night owl toward sleep. You'll be gliding past tapestries that shimmer faintly in the firelight, hearing the soft crackle of logs in great stone hearths, and smelling the mixture of cinnamon roasting meat and beeswax polish in the air. But be warned, if you ever found yourself transported there for real, you probably wouldn't survive the food. Not because it was poisonous, but because your stomach isn't built for medieval spice levels, nor for meat that's been aged in ways modern refrigerators would find scandalous. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and the local time in the comments. It's always fun to see who's listening from where, and just how late you all stay up. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. We begin in the great hall of a wealthy household, a sprawling space with a timbered roof high above hung with banners in the Lord's colors. A long table runs down the center, draped in linen so white it almost glows in the candlelight. Servants bustle quietly, setting out pewter chargers and carved wooden trenchers. The air smells faintly of rosemary and bay, the herbs scattered on the rush-strewn floor to mask less pleasant odors. This is no rustic village meal. This is a performance of status where every dish and every ingredient is meant to say, "We can afford this." In the Middle Ages, the rich didn't just eat to live, they ate to display their power, their connections, and their ability to obtain foods that others could barely imagine. Imported spices were a kind of edible jewelry saffron from distant lands, cinnamon and cloves from trade routes so long and dangerous that every pinch carried the weight of ships and caravans behind it. Sugar, real cane sugar, was rare and expensive, often kept under lock and key in the Lord's pantry. Almonds, another costly import, were ground into milk for sauces and custards, lending a smooth richness to dishes that made them stand out from the coarse fare of the common folk. The day's meal would begin with what was called a pottage, a thick, slow-cooked stew that might contain venison from the Lord's own forest, or perhaps rabbit or capon, simmered with leeks, parsley, and a handful of those precious imported spices. Sometimes, especially during Lent, or on religious fast days, it would be made entirely of fish, pike, eel, or even salted herring, brought from coastal markets, thickened with breadcrumbs or almond milk, until it was more like a pudding than a soup. For the wealthy, even a fast could feel indulgent. And then there were the showpieces. A banquet might feature a roast swan, its skin carefully gilded with edible gold leaf, a peacock, as I mentioned, redressed in its own dazzling plumage, or an enormous boar's head jaw propped open to reveal its teeth with an apple wedged artfully between them. These were not dishes you ate casually. They were paraded into the hall to fanfare, admired, perhaps tasted, but mostly remembered as a statement. The bread itself was another clue to status. While peasants gnawed on coarse loaves made from rye or barley, the rich enjoyed fine, pale bread baked from sifted wheat flour, something called manchet in later centuries. This bread was soft enough to tear with your fingers and often used to soak up gravies and sauces in place of a spoon. Sometimes it doubled as a plate. Thick slabs of bread, called trenchers, would be piled with food, absorbing all the flavorful drippings, and then if the eater was feeling generous, passed on to the servants or the poor waiting outside the hall. Between courses, the wealthy refreshed their palates with something called a subtlety, not subtle at all in our sense of the word. These were elaborate sugar sculptures, molded marzipan castles, or tiny edible scenes made from candied fruit. They were as much art as food, designed to surprise and entertain. One might depict a hunting party, another a scene from a popular romance, all crafted in painstaking detail, destined to be admired more than eaten. Wine was the drink of choice, but it rarely came unaltered to the table. It might be mulled with spices, sweetened with honey, or even mixed with rose water for fragrance. Ale and beer were considered more common beverages, though they might still appear for breakfast or lighter meals. The wealthy could afford the luxury of variety, a different drink for each course if they wished. But beneath the grandeur lay a reality you might find quietly unsettling. Preservation was a challenge in the medieval world, even for the wealthy. Meat might be eaten fresh, but more often it was salted, smoked, or even deliberately left to ripen, developing strong, gamey flavors that were then masked with spice. Butter could turn quickly in the summer heat. Milk soured within hours. To us, the idea of eating food kept in such ways might sound alarming. To them, it was normal. And for those who could afford plenty of spice, it was also delicious. Picture yourself sitting near the middle of that long table, your wooden cup filled with a dark red wine that smells faintly of cinnamon and cloves. Before you is a trencher of soft wheat bread already stained golden from the saffron-rich sauce pooling under a slice of roast venison. You can feel the warmth of the fire on your face, hear the soft murmur of conversation around you. At the far end, your host laughs loudly at something his steward has whispered. A servant approaches bearing a silver platter piled with pastries, flaky, buttery little creations filled with minced fruit and sweetened cheese. As the courses pass, the room grows warmer, the candle flames lower. The scents blend together into something both comforting and overwhelming. The sweetness of honey, the bite of vinegar in a sharp sauce, the savory depth of roasting meat. A lute player in the corner begins a soft melody, and you feel the rhythm of the evening slowing, though you know there are still more dishes to come. This, then, was the experience of dining among the rich in the Middle Ages. A careful dance of abundance, performance, and taste where the food was both sustenance and theater. And though your modern palate might hesitate at some of the flavors, you'd be swept up in the spectacle all the same, lulled by the warmth, the richness, and the steady hum of life in the great hall. The evening meal, called supper in the later Middle Ages, was the social event of the day for the wealthy, and not just for those seated at the high table. You'd find minor nobles, honored guests, and even well-placed merchants clustered closer to the warmth and light, their places determined by a complex web of status and favor. The nearer you sat to the lord or lady, the more prestigious and the better the food. Those seated farthest down the hall might receive simpler cuts of meat, less elaborate sauces, and fewer of the prized sweet dishes. It was a subtle reminder that even within privilege, there were layers. The servants moved in a rhythm honed over years, each knowing exactly when to step forward and when to fade back. The cupbearer had his slow circuit, topping up goblets with wine from a heavy silver ewer. The carver, a roll of honor, approached the roast with practiced ceremony, slicing neat portions and arranging them just so before sending them down the line. At the high table, the lord and his guests were served first. Then the dishes moved outward like ripples on a pond. Many of these servants were not merely hired help, but part of the household structure. Some of them from minor gentry families themselves, gaining connections and training for future positions. They wore the livery colors of the household, deep crimson perhaps, or rich green, making them part of the visual spectacle, as well as the smooth operation of the meal. Between courses, basins of scented water were brought for washing the hands. Dining was a tactile experience. You used your fingers to tear bread, to pick delicate morsels from shared platters, so clean hands were both practical and polite. A fine linen towel would be offered after washing, and you'd pat your fingers dry before accepting the next dish. Tonight, one of those dishes might be a pottage made with almond milk thickened to a creamy consistency and flavored with ginger and galangale. Pieces of capon, a castrated rooster prized for its tender meat, bob in the broth alongside chopped parsley and tender leeks. The aroma is warm and nutty with a faint sharpness from the spice. A ladleful is poured into your trencher, where it soaks the bread beneath, creating a rich, edible bowl. There is also a dish of blancmange, not the modern dessert, but a medieval preparation of shredded chicken simmered with rice, almond milk, and sugar, pale and comforting, garnished with a sprinkle of cinnamon. The soft, mild flavors contrast with the spice-laden roasts and the sharpness of pickled vegetables, offering a moment of gentle relief in the parade of sensations. Pickles, in fact, were a key part of the wealthy table. Cucumber cabbage, even young walnuts might be preserved in vinegar spiced with cloves and mace. These sharp, tangy bites cut through the richness of meat and pastry, refreshing the palate between heavier mouthfuls. Alongside them, there might be fresh fruit when in season. Cherries or plums in early summer apples, and pears in autumn, or dried fruit plumped in wine or honey available year-round. And then comes the pastry. Medieval pastry was not always the flaky, buttery type, you know. Often it was a sturdy crust meant to hold the filling through baking. But for the rich pastry could be light and delicate, enriched with butter eggs and fine flour. Small pies filled with minced pork and sweet spices, fruit tarts glazed with honey, custard pies fragrant with nutmeg, each carried to the table in procession, to be sliced and served with a flourish. By now, the hall is alive with the warm hum of voices, the clink of knives on trenchers, the occasional burst of laughter. A jug of Hippocras wine sweetened and spiced with cinnamon ginger and grains of paradise is making the rounds, its ruby liquid catching the light as it's poured. The fragrance is heady, almost hypnotic, and you take a careful sip, feeling the warmth spread down into your chest. In the corner, the lute player is joined by a small harp, their notes weaving a gentle counterpoint to the chatter. You feel yourself settling deeper into the rhythm of the evening, the flow of dishes and sounds carrying you along. The servants have lit fresh candles, and the shadows on the walls sway softly with the movement of the flames. And then the centerpiece of the meal appears. Tonight, it is a roast peacock resplendent in its own plumage. The bird has been carefully skinned before roasting, the skin preserved, and the feathers kept intact. Once the bird is cooked, the skin and feathers are artfully replaced, the tail fanned in a dazzling arc. Its beak and claws gleam with a touch of gold leaf, and in its beak is a small twist of paper, perhaps a verse in praise of the host or a playful riddle. The murmurs ripple through the hall as it is set before the high table. It is less a dish than a performance, a demonstration that the household can command both exotic ingredients and skilled hands to prepare them. Slices of the peacock are carved with ceremony revealing dark, rich meat. The flavor is gamey, more intense than chicken, the texture firm. It's served with a sauce of wine and ginger thickened with ground almonds, a luxurious accompaniment. You take a small bite, noting the slightly unfamiliar taste to the spice rounding out the depth of the meat. The next dish is gentler, a pike poached in a fragrant broth, and served with green sauce made from parsley, sage, and sorrel sharpened with vinegar and thickened with breadcrumbs. The sauce is bright and herbal, cutting cleanly through the richness of the earlier roasts. And always the bread keeps arriving, fresh manchettes still warm, with soft, pale interiors, and crusts that tear away in satisfying chunks. You find yourself using it as both utensil and sponge, wiping your trencher clean after each course. The warmth of the bread, the comfort of its simple flavor, is a grounding point amid the procession of exotic dishes. For the rich, this variety was more than indulgence, it was insurance. If one dish did not please another would. If a guest had a distaste for game, there was fish. If they found the fish too strong, there was poultry or a mild pottage. To be able to offer such abundance was the mark of a household's power and generosity. And yet, as you glance toward the far end of the hall, you see the servants and lesser guests making do with plainer fare, a joint of mutton, some boiled cabbage, coarse bread. They eat with quiet efficiency, knowing their place, but the smells drifting down from the high table are unmistakably richer, more complex. The social order is reflected in every bite, every aroma. As the main courses begin to taper, there's a pause. A servant clears away the trenchers, wiping the table with a cloth dampened in rosewater. Fresh rushes are scattered near the hearth, releasing their green scent into the warm air. The fire pops softly, sending a brief spray of sparks up the chimney. Somewhere outside, a night breeze stirs, rattling a shutter. Dessert is coming, though. In the Middle Ages, dessert was less about sweet endings and more about aiding digestion after a heavy meal. Candied ginger comfits of anise or fennel seeds coated in sugar wafers flavored with rosewater, and small cups of spiced wine or herbal infusions might appear. These were light, fragrant notes to close the evening, meant to settle the stomach and leave the mouth sweet. You take a wafer, crisp, thin, delicately scented, and let it dissolve slowly on your tongue. The sweet spice lingers, mingling with the warmth of the hypocras. Around you, guests are leaning back, conversations slowing. A few are already slipping into the kind of mellow silence that comes from a well-fed, well-watered evening. The musicians play one last soft air. A servant appears with a final basin of warm water for washing the hands. The ritual, both cleansing and symbolic, the feast is done. The Lord rises, offering a word of thanks to his guests, and the evening begins its gentle drift toward rest. And so you find yourself sitting quietly, the fire's heat on your cheek, the rich scents fading to embers in the air. The hum of the hall has become a low murmur, the candlelight a slow flicker. You are warm, drowsy, and full both with food and with the sense of having stepped briefly into a world of abundance long past. The night doesn't end the moment the feast is cleared. In a wealthy medieval household, the after-supper hours carry their own quiet rituals. Some guests linger in the hall, talking in low voices near the hearth, while others drift toward the withdrawing chamber, a smaller, warmer room, where only the highest-ranking company is invited. Here, away from the larger bustle, the conversation can be more intimate, the gestures more relaxed. You follow the slow current of movement into that smaller room. The heavy oak door swings inward, revealing a space lined with carved panels, the scent of polished wood mingling with the last traces of dinner spices. Cushioned benches run along the walls, and in the center sits a low table bearing a scattering of sweetmeats in small pewter dishes. There are comfits, sugar-coated seeds gleaming like tiny pearls, preserved quinces, their jewel-colored flesh translucent in the candlelight, and a shallow bowl of dried figs, their wrinkled skins dusted faintly with sugar. Someone offers you a goblet of warm posset, a mixture of milk curdled with wine or ale thickened with eggs and sweetened with honey. It's creamy and fragrant, the kind of drink that coats the throat and spreads warmth through your chest. Sipping it slowly, you feel the meal settling in your stomach, the sharp edges of hunger long since blunted. The talk turns toward hunting stories, falconry, and the news from neighboring estates. These are the rhythms of upper-class life in the Middle Ages, a cycle of land management, hospitality, and seasonal entertainments. But woven through these conversations is an unspoken current. The ability to speak of such things at leisure is itself a sign of wealth. While peasants spend the evening tending fires, mending clothes, or preparing for the next day's work, the rich can afford to linger over confections and spiced drinks. The small table is replenished almost without notice. A servant arrives with marchpane, a dense, sweet almond paste shaped into little squares and brushed with rose water. The texture is slightly gritty from the ground nuts, the sweetness soft rather than sharp. You take one, letting it melt slowly against your tongue, the faint floral note rising at the back of your throat. In another dish, candied orange peel gleams like amber shards. The peel is chewy, the bitterness of the rind softened by long boiling in syrup. It leaves a faint citrus perfume in your mouth, a bright contrast to the richness of the evening's earlier fare. You imagine the care it took to prepare such treats in a time when sugar was measured out by weight, as precious as certain spices, and spices themselves remain the unifying thread of the wealthy table. Even now, in the quiet after-meal room, their ghost lingers. The hippocras you sipped earlier leaves traces of cinnamon and ginger on your tongue. The almond pottage and peacock sauce rise again faintly in your memory. The saffron, the cloves. These are not incidental flavors. They are declarations, proof that the household has access to the far-flung trade routes of Venice, the Levant, even India. The candles in the withdrawing room burn with a steady glow, their beeswax scent sweet and faintly honeyed. Shadows lean gently across the paneling, and you feel the heaviness in your limbs begin to deepen. It's easy to imagine that this moment could stretch on indefinitely, soft voices, sweet tastes, the hum of comfort. Yet even here, the structure of medieval life asserts itself. The host excuses himself to speak with the steward. The lady of the house beckons her gentlewomen closer to discuss arrangements for the next day's guests, and the low murmur shifts in tone. For you, the listener wandering through this scene, the night is a tapestry of small details. A hand resting on a goblet's stem, the flicker of gold thread at the cuff of a gown, the muted creak of a servant's shoes on the rushes, and underlying it all, the knowledge that tomorrow will bring another round of meals, each shaped by the same careful choreography of wealth and tradition. Eventually, the evening's company disperses. Some guests will stay the night, shown to their chambers, where a bed with feather mattress and heavy woolen blankets waits. Others will return to their own homes, cloaks drawn close against the cool night air. As the door closes behind them, the great hall is left in a hushed stillness, the smell of the feast still lingering like a memory in the beams. If you stayed the night, you might wake to find breakfast laid out a simpler affair than supper, but still far from the bread and ale breakfast of common folk. The wealthy might begin the day with white bread spread with fresh butter, small cakes flavored with anise, or soft cheese served with honey. There might be ale or small beer, or perhaps a diluted wine for those who preferred it. In winter, a hot pottage might appear thick with oats and sweetened with dried fruit. The household would already be stirring toward the day's business. Servants clear the ashes from the hearth, fetch water, and begin the slow work of preparing the day's main meal, the dinner served in late morning or early afternoon. For the rich, this dinner could be as elaborate as the supper you've just witnessed, though often with a slightly lighter touch. Yet even a lighter meal would still dazzle by most standards. There might be baked lampreys in a spiced wine sauce, pigeons roasted and served with a sharp verjuice dressing, or tender young rabbits stewed with herbs. A dish of green peas fresh if the season allows, dried if not simmered in almond milk, and brightened with mint could appear alongside them. The bread would again be fine wheat, the butter fresh churned, the wine sweetened or spiced according to taste. And always there is the underlying current of display. Even at breakfast or dinner, the presence of imported items, sugar, almonds, saffron, announces the household's reach. The wealthy do not eat plainly unless they choose to, and even then, the plainness is curated. The idea of plain food for the rich might mean a roast capon simply seasoned with salt and parsley, served without an elaborate sauce. For a peasant, that would be a feast beyond imagining. It's a reminder that in the Middle Ages, as now wealth shapes not only what you eat, but how you think about food itself. Returning to the great hall later in the day, you might find preparations already underway for another evening gathering. The tables are scrubbed, the floor newly strewn with fresh rushes and herbs. In the kitchen, a world you've yet to see, the cooks are busy over open hearths, turning spits, pounding spice mixtures in heavy mortars and stirring great cauldrons suspended over the flames. The heat is intense, the air thick with the mingled aromas of meat bread and wood smoke. A kitchen in a wealthy household is itself a marvel. There are separate workstations for pastry, for roasting, for boiling. Scullions haul water from the well, their arms slick with sweat. Dogs lurk hopefully near the chopping blocks, ready to snatch scraps. The master cook oversees it all, tasting sauces, adjusting seasonings, calling for more almond milk or saffron. Every dish is the result of coordinated labor. The almond milk must be strained 3 times to achieve the right smoothness. The sugar must be pounded to a fine powder before it can be sprinkled on marchpane. The pastry for a fruit tart must be chilled before baking, no small feat in a medieval kitchen. These details, invisible to the guests, are essential to the impression of effortless abundance that the Lord's table conveys. And so the rhythm of eating among the rich continues a cycle of planning, preparation, display, and enjoyment. Each meal an opportunity to reinforce status and delight the senses. For those who live it, it is simply the way of things. For you, drifting quietly through their world, it is a slow, steady immersion in the textures, flavors, and scents of a time long gone. The day drifts toward evening once more, the great hall ready to welcome another round of guests, the kitchen, a low roar of fire and work. Somewhere in the distance, a bell rings the hour, and the servants quicken their pace. The promise of another long, glowing supper lies just ahead, and the story you've stepped into is far from over. The bell's echo fades into the stone corridors, and the great hall seems to hold its breath before the evening stirs again. Servants hurry to make the final adjustments. Fresh linens smoothed across the tables. Tall beeswax candles replaced where the wicks have burned low cups and pitchers set in gleaming rows. The scent of rosemary and bay newly scattered on the rushes rises each time a foot passes over them. It is as much a part of the meal as the dishes themselves, a soft green fragrance that mingles with the richer smells drifting in from the kitchen. In that kitchen, the air is thick and warm, the shadows restless from the flames. The great open hearth glows with steady heat, spits creaking gently as they turn. A whole venison haunch slowly browns, basting itself in its own juices, while a servant with a long-handled ladle spoons over a glaze of honey vinegar and crushed peppercorns. Nearby, a boar's head is being readied for presentation, its eyes replaced with bright glass beads, its snout rubbed with oil to make it shine under the hall's candlelight. At another station, a cook tends a large cauldron of fish pottage. The broth is milk-white from ground almonds flecked with green from parsley and fennel. Slivers of pike drift lazily in the simmering liquid. The cook tests the seasoning, then calls for more galangale, its faintly peppery scent filling the air as it's stirred in. A few steps away, the pastry cook rolls out dough on a floured board, carefully lining small round tins for fruit tarts. The filling apples, cooked down with sugar cinnamon, and a splash of wine steams gently in a nearby pan. There's a rhythm to it all, the measured chopping of herbs, the thump of a pestle against the mortar, the hiss of meat meeting hot fat. The cooks move like dancers in slow, practiced steps, each knowing where to reach, when to stir, when to pull something from the fire before it tips from perfect to ruined. And all the while the household hums in preparation for the guests who will soon arrive. The lord of the house is already dressed for the evening, his tunic rich with embroidery in gold and crimson, a heavy chain around his neck catching the last of the daylight filtering through the tall windows. The lady in a gown of deep blue moves through the hall, speaking quietly to the steward, checking the arrangements. Her sleeves trail slightly as she gestures the fine cloth whispering against the table's edge. This is as much her realm as the Lord's. The smooth running of a household on display to guests is a measure of her own skill and authority. Outside, the sky shifts from copper to indigo, the air cooling as the sun sinks. A few guests arrive early, their cloaks damp with evening dew. They are greeted at the door by liveried servants led to a small side table where cups of warmed wine await to take the chill from their hands. Soft greetings are exchanged, and the rustle of fine fabrics follows them as they move toward the high table's waiting seats. When the meal begins, it does so with a kind of stately ease. A servant brings in a tall silver ewer and basin for the ritual washing of hands, moving first to the Lord, then the guests at the high table. The water is faintly scented, perhaps with lavender or rose, and the linen towels are freshly laundered, their edges crisply folded. Clean hands are not only practical but ceremonial. The act marks the beginning of the feast, as surely as the first bite of food. The first course tonight is a subtle warming pottage minced capon, simmered in almond milk, thickened with rice and lightly sweetened. A sprinkle of cinnamon across the top releases its aroma as the steam curls upward. The dish is gentle, coaxing the appetite awake without overwhelming it. Alongside it are fine white manchettes, still warm their crusts, delicate and easily torn. You use a piece to scoop up a spoonful of the creamy pottage, the bread soaking up the sauce, the two textures melting together in your mouth. From the kitchen comes the second course, roasted venison, sliced into generous portions, its edges crisp and caramelized. The meat is served with a sauce of wine and crushed juniper berries, the tang and piney note balancing the richness. A bowl of spiced cabbage accompanies it, the purple leaves glistening in a dressing of vinegar and cloves. The combination is deeply satisfying, the sharpness cutting through the savory depth of the roast. Further down the table, platters of baked lampreys are set out, an expensive delicacy coiled in their pastry crust, like a spiral of dark jewels. The sauce is thick and glossy, made with red wine mace and a hint of ginger. It clings to the fish with a richness that speaks of both skill and extravagance. At the same time, lighter dishes circulate, a green salad of young leaves dressed with oil and verjuice bowls of stewed peas flavored with mint, and plates of fresh figs split and drizzled with honey. Even in the colder months, the wealthy find ways to keep variety at their tables: dried fruit, imported oil, preserved herbs, each item carrying the silent weight of cost and care. Between courses, servers sweep in to replace trenchers, refresh cups, and bring fresh linen cloths for wiping the hands. The high table is never left wanting. The service is a constant, seamless flow. The clink of cups and the murmur of conversation rise and fall like a tide, punctuated now and then by a burst of laughter from some shared jest. And then the boar's head makes its entrance. Two servants carry it on a broad wooden board, the glazed snout catching the candlelight, the jaws open as if mid-growl. An apple shines between its teeth, and sprigs of bay and rosemary frame its face. A low ripple of admiration passes through the hall as it is set before the Lord, who nods with quiet satisfaction. The carving is deliberate, the slices thick and generous. The meat is dense, the flavor bold, complemented by a sauce of mustard and honey. With the main roasts served, attention shifts to the pastry table. Small pies with minced venison and dried fruit are sliced open to release a sweet, savory steam. Custard tarts, their pale yellow centers flecked with nutmeg, are passed around on silver platters. For those with a sweet tooth, marchpane shapes, flowers, birds, even miniature castles appear, their almond scent delicate under the sugar crust. The musicians in the corner have moved from gentle airs to livelier tunes, the rhythm quickening slightly as the meal nears its height. The warmth of the wine, the richness of the food, and the glow of the fire all combine into a comfortable haze. You take another sip of Hippocras, the spice lingering on your tongue, and feel a pleasant heaviness in your limbs. As the feast slows, the final sweets arrive, wafers thin as parchment perfumed with rosewater, comfits in tiny silver dishes, candied ginger with its slow burn. A final basin of scented water is passed around, for washing hands, the act a quiet signal that the meal is drawing to its close. The guests lean back in their chairs, speaking more softly, their voices softened by contentment. The candles gutter slightly in a faint draft, shadows shifting lazily along the walls. Somewhere beyond the hall, a dog barks once and falls silent. The night has settled fully outside, pressing its cool darkness against the warm heart of the house. And here, in the circle of firelight and candle glow, the rich of the Middle Ages pass another evening, much like the last, secure in their abundance, their status reinforced with every bite, every shared cup, every subtlety of flavor and service. For you watching quietly from your seat, it is another step deeper into their world, the layers of ritual and taste unfolding, at a pace as slow and steady as the turning of the spits in the kitchen. When the feast has finally ebbed into its quiet afterglow, the hall doesn't empty all at once. Some guests linger over the last drops in their goblets, swirling the wine lazily, as if reluctant to surrender the night's pleasures. Others stand in small knots, conversing in low voices, their laughter now softer, more private. A servant slips through these clusters with a tray of warm towels, the steam rising from the folded linen like pale threads of smoke. The high table's plates are cleared first, each trencher lifted with a practiced sweep, and carried toward the kitchen, where the night's work is far from over. The scent of the meal still clings heavily in the air. Roasted meat-spiced sauces, the faint perfume of candied fruit, all of it settling into the linen, the rushes, the very beams overhead. In a medieval house, feasting was never simply an event to be contained in one moment. Its impressions lingered sometimes for days, in the smells, the stories, and the quiet satisfaction that followed. The household musicians, sensing the shift in the room, move toward gentler melodies. The lute plays low, the harp's strings shimmering like threads of water in the background. You can almost feel your own breathing matching the rhythm, slow, deliberate, in tune with the easy sway of the music. This is the point where conversation trails into drowsy silences, the warmth of food and fire coaxing guests toward a state of calm that borders on sleep. Yet for the servants, there's still a rhythm to keep. The carved boar's head is returned to the kitchen, where its remaining meat will be carefully stripped away for later meals. Pastry scraps are set aside for servants' suppers, bread crusts gathered to feed the household dogs or pigs. Nothing in a well-run noble kitchen goes entirely to waste, even when the abundance seems limitless. You catch sight of the lord and lady rising from the high table, making their way toward the withdrawing chamber for a final round of cordial drinks. Guests of sufficient rank follow. Others take the cue to depart, drawing cloaks over their fine tunics, murmuring thanks as they pass through the door into the cool night. Their departure is marked by the muted thud of the heavy wooden door closing behind them, the echo lingering in the dimming hall. Inside the withdrawing chamber, a smaller fire burns with a steady glow. Here the air is warmer, scented now, with nutmeg and honey from the spiced drinks being poured. A servant offers you a small cup of mead, the golden liquid catching the light, the sweetness carrying a faint herbal undertone. Sipping it slowly, you feel the tension drain from your shoulders. Mead is gentler than wine, its warmth unfolding gradually, its sweetness clinging like a memory to the back of your tongue. On the table are small dishes of marchpane cut into lozenges, each dusted lightly with sugar. Beside them, there's a shallow bowl of preserved cherries, their syrup deep and jewel red. You spear one with the tip of a small knife, tasting the sharp, sweet burst as the fruit yields between your teeth. These are the lingering notes of the evening, not heavy or overwhelming, but enough to remind you of the household's wealth and reach. Talk here is softer still. The lord inquires after a visiting night's journey. The lady speaks quietly to a cousin about an upcoming feast day. The fire pops gently, sparks darting upward before vanishing into the chimney's dark. You sink a little deeper into your seat, feeling the weight of the day settle pleasantly over you. In the kitchen, meanwhile, the night crew has taken over. Large pots are scraped clean, their contents poured into smaller vessels for storage. Spits are lifted from the hearth and set against the wall, their metal cooling in the draft from the open back door. The scullions, the lowest rank in the kitchen, scrub the great wooden boards, their knuckles raw from hot water and lye soap. The air in here is thick with the smell of damp ashes and the faint sourness of used cooking fat. It's a world apart from the refinement of the hall, yet it hums with its own quiet what industry. The kitchen dogs curl up in warm corners, bellies full from scraps, their paws twitching in dreams. Somewhere in the shadows, a cat stretches languidly, eyes half closed, content to let the heat of the hearth seep into its fur. Even in the busiest rooms, there are pockets of stillness if you know where to look. By now, the outer gates have been closed for the night. The courtyard lies quiet under the stars, the air cool and smelling faintly of damp earth and hay. In the stables, the horses shift in their stalls, hooves shuffling softly against the straw. Somewhere in the distance, an owl calls its sound, drifting in like a fragment of the dark itself. The great hall, once the center of sound and motion, has settled into a slow, steady rhythm. The candles burn lower, their flames leaning slightly in the faint movement of air from the chimney. The rushes underfoot release a last whisper of their green scent each time someone crosses the room. The long table stands bare now, its linen removed, the surface faintly sticky from wine spills that will be cleaned in the morning. You find yourself imagining the days of preparation that led to tonight, the choosing of menus, the ordering of spices from distant merchants, the arrangement of seats to flatter and honor. Feasts for the wealthy were not spontaneous affairs. They were as carefully constructed as any performance, each detail contributing to the overall impression of a household both gracious and powerful. Even the smallest decisions carried meaning. Serving peacock over swan might hint at exotic connections. Offering fresh strawberries in spring could imply access to private gardens tended with skill. The spices chosen for a sauce were as much about prestige as flavor. To taste saffron in your soup was to taste the wealth of your host. And so, while the night winds down, its memory will ripple outward. Guests will speak of it in other halls, describing the rich dishes, the gold-leafed subtleties, the warm hospitality. The household's name will be spoken with respect, and perhaps a touch of envy, and that was in its own way the true feast. Back in the withdrawing chamber, the last of the drinks are poured, the conversation fading into quiet. The lord and lady exchange a final few words with their most favored guests before bidding them good night. Servants collect the empty cups, banking the fire so it will burn low until morning. The last candle is snuffed with a faint hiss, and darkness folds itself gently around the room. The only sounds now are the distant stirrings of the kitchen crew finishing their work, the faint creak of settling timbers, the occasional muffled whinny from the stables. The household has entered its night-long slumber, its wealth resting as heavily in silence as it did in the clamor of the feast. You step back from the scene, the images lingering golden candlelight on silver dishes, the shimmer of embroidered sleeves, the fragrance of cinnamon and rosemary in the warm air. The rich of the Middle Ages did not just eat. They wove a tapestry of sights, scents, and flavors to wrap around themselves and their guests. And in this quiet after the feast, the tapestry lies undisturbed, holding the warmth of the evening until the next grand supper begins. Morning in a wealthy medieval household begins before the sun is fully up, but it's not the clanging rush of a market town or the clatter of a craftsman's shop. Here the waking is slower, softer, threaded with the deliberate motions of servants who know their tasks and their timing. The hearths are coaxed back to life from last night's embers, the pale smoke curling lazily into the cool air. Outside, the mist still clings low over the courtyard, and the grass glitters faintly with dew. For the lords and ladies, the first sounds are not the bustling of kitchen pots, but the muted creak of a door as a servant enters quietly with a jug of fresh water. The chamber is still dim, the shutters only partly open, letting in the faintest wash of morning light. Somewhere far below, in the great kitchen, the day's first bread is already baking, the yeasty scent rising on the warm air and threading its way upward through the stone stairwells. The early meal for the wealthy is nothing like the hearty porridge and ale of the common folk. Here breakfast might mean manchette bread spread with fresh butter churned that morning, perhaps a soft cheese set on a silver plate beside a small dish of honey. There could be wafers flavored with anise delicate enough to crumble at the touch, or a small cake made with eggs and sweetened with sugar, a luxury at any time of day. And always there is something warm to drink, a light ale, a diluted wine, or even a spiced infusion, brewed from imported herbs. In the great hall, the tables are not yet set for the main meal of the day, but a smaller board near the fire holds these breakfast offerings. The fire itself burns low, its warmth pleasant in the cool morning air. Servants move quietly, placing cups and trenchers, their livery neat and freshly brushed. The high-backed chairs at the Lord's table stand empty for now, waiting for the day's more formal gathering. As you take a piece of bread and spread it with soft golden butter, you can taste the faint tang of freshness, the gentle sweetness of cream still warm from the cow that morning. A spoonful of honey follows its amber richness soaking into the crumb. These are small luxuries, but they speak of a household that can afford to keep dairy cows, maintain hives, and store such goods year-round. Soon after, the hall begins to stir with more purposeful activity. Today will bring another midday dinner, the true centerpiece of the day's eating, and already the kitchen has begun its quiet symphony of preparation. You decide to step inside that world again, slipping through the side door into the long, low room that hums with heat and movement. The air here is dense with the scent of fresh-cut herbs, wood smoke, and something faintly metallic from the great pots hanging over the fire. Near the open hearth, two boys turn spits of poultry, likely capons or ducks, the fat dripping onto the glowing embers with a hiss. The spits creak rhythmically as they turn, a sound as much a part of cooking as the bubbling of pots or the thump of a cleaver on a block. At a nearby table, a cook is pounding almonds in a mortar, the steady measured sound echoing off the walls. The crushed nuts will be soaked in warm water, strained through fine cloth, and used to make almond milk the base for a sauce or pottage. A tray of fragrant spices sits within reach: cinnamon sticks, pale threads of saffron, small dried berries of pepper. Each pinch is measured with care, each ingredient guarded as one might guard coin. Closer to the center of the room, a woman is kneading dough for another batch of bread. Her hands work steadily, folding and pressing, the motion both strong and fluid. Now and then she dusts the board with fine flour, not the coarse, dark meal of peasants, but the sifted white flour reserved for the upper table. Nearby, another servant shapes pastries, spooning in a filling of minced dried fruit mixed with wine and sugar. The smell is sweet, rich, and faintly sharp with spice. There is no chaos here, only an ordered hum. The cooks speak to one another in low tones, calling for a ladle or asking the fire to be stoked. Scullions move quickly to fetch water, sweep away scraps, or carry dishes to the cooler side of the room where they can rest before serving. Every movement serves the larger goal to have each dish ready in its time, arriving at the hall neither rushed nor delayed. Back in the hall, the tables are being laid with fine linen pewter chargers and polished goblets. The Lord's seat at the high end of the long board is marked by a slightly taller chair with carved arms. Beside it will sit the lady of the house, her place adorned with a folded napkin in a precise decorative knot. Down the table, places for honored guests are being set with equal care, though without the same subtle marks of rank. The midday dinner will soon begin, and once again the hall will fill with warmth, light, and the mingled scents of cooking. The first course may be a gentle pottage, perhaps a chicken and rice preparation scented with saffron, accompanied by manchette bread fresh from the oven. Next might come roasted venison with a sauce of red wine and cloves, or baked pike with green sauce made from parsley, sage, and sorrel. Bowls of vegetables, cabbage stewed with vinegar, peas simmered in butter, will appear alongside their colors bright against the silver and pewter. Between these richer dishes, lighter offerings help balance the meal. A plate of sliced apples drizzled with honey, a bowl of pickled cucumbers, a handful of preserved cherries. Each one is small in portion, but large in its message. Here is a household that has both variety and the means to keep it. As the courses pass, the pace is unhurried. The servants know when to step forward, when to pull back, when to let the music from the corner fill the space between bites. Wine is refilled with quiet efficiency, the silver ewer tilting gracefully over each goblet. The soft murmur of conversation grows and fades like the breathing of the hall itself. And always there is bread. Warm, pale, finely milled, the bread of the rich. You tear off a piece, dipping it into the saffron golden sauce from a roasted bird, feeling the way the flavors soak into the crumb. Bread is the constant thread in this tapestry of abundance, as much a symbol of status as the gold leaf subtleties or the rare spices. When the dinner finally draws to a close, a basin of scented water is passed for washing the hands, followed by a small dish of candied fennel seeds or anise. These tiny sweets refresh the breath and mark the formal end of the meal. The hall grows quieter, the guests leaning back, their bellies comfortably full. The day will not end here. There will be supper in the evening, another chance to gather and display the household's wealth. But for now, the warmth of the midday meal lingers, a steady comfort that seeps into the slow hours of the afternoon. In this rhythm of dining, the rich of the Middle Ages move not in hurried snatches of food, but in a measured procession of flavors, each one savored, each one reinforcing the place they hold in the world. And as you lean back in your seat, feeling the gentle weight of bread, meat, and spice settle into you, it is easy to see how such meals could become the anchor points of a life not just for sustenance, but for the steady reaffirming of order, comfort, and status. The afternoon in a great household drifts into a kind of measured quiet. The heavy bustle of the dinner service has passed, and the hall stands empty, but for a few servants clearing the last of the cups and wiping down the boards. Sunlight filters through the high windows, casting pale golden patches on the floor, strewn with fresh rushes. You can still smell the mingled traces of the meal. Warm bread, roasted meat, the faint sharpness of vinegar from the pickled vegetables, but they hang lightly now like the echo of music after the last note has faded. In the kitchen, the fires are banked lower. Large cauldrons of broth simmer gently, a stock for future use. The spits rest against the wall, their metal cooling faintly greasy in the dim light. A few scullions kneel near the floor, scrubbing the flagstones with buckets of lye water, the sound of their brushes rasping softly. Over in a corner, the pastry cook tends to tomorrow's pie crusts, rolling the dough with slow, deliberate motions, her sleeves dusted white with flour. For the lord and lady, the afternoon is not idle, though it may appear so to an outside eye. There may be letters to read from other estates, matters of land, and rent to discuss with the steward, arrangements to finalize for the next round of guests. Yet these duties are often carried out with a cup of spiced wine at hand, seated by a window where the light is kind and the air scented faintly with the herbs growing in the courtyard garden. That garden is another hidden part of the wealthy table. Protected by high walls, it offers more than beauty. Here grow sage, rosemary, thyme, parsley, and mint herbs that flavor nearly every dish in the household's kitchen. There are also medicinal plants, fennel for digestion, chamomile for calming, lavender for scenting linens. A few beds hold delicate greens for salad, and against a sunny wall, espaliered pear trees ripen their fruit. Even in the depth of winter, the garden is tended for in this world. Fresh herbs are not a luxury to be left to chance. From the garden, your mind drifts to the storerooms, a part of the house few guests ever see. Here, the abundance of the household is preserved against time and season. Great barrels hold salted meat and fish. Sacks of grain are stacked neatly in dry corners. Shelves display jars of preserved fruit, honey-soaked quince, candied ginger, and pickled walnuts. There are baskets of onions and garlic, their skins rustling faintly in the still air. In a smaller locked cabinet, you would find the true treasures, saffron-sealed in waxed cloth cinnamon sticks, bound with cord, tiny jars of imported sugar. These are guarded as carefully as coin. The servants responsible for these stores keep careful records. They know how much saffron is left, how many pounds of sugar remain, and which barrels must be used first before they spoil. Wasting such goods would be not only expensive, but shameful, a sign of poor management that could tarnish the household's reputation as surely as a badly executed feast. As the afternoon edges toward evening, the pace in the kitchen quickens again. The fires are stoked, higher spits set up for roasting pots filled with water to boil. Supper is not usually as grand as the midday dinner, but in a wealthy home it still far outshines anything the common folk might eat in a week. It is lighter in tone, but not necessarily in richness. A chance to enjoy smaller game, delicate pastries, or simply a variety of dishes chosen for their elegance rather than their extravagance. Tonight the cook prepares a stew of rabbit simmered slowly with onions, leeks, and a touch of mustard. Nearby, a pie is being filled with chopped capon, hard-boiled eggs, and prunes, the mixture seasoned with pepper and mace. A pot of peas is cooking with fresh mint, their green scent rising with the steam. On a cooler table, a servant arranges slices of pear and apple ready to be drizzled with honey just before serving. The bread, as always, is fresh. A batch of manchettes has come from the oven, their crusts pale and fine, the crumbs soft and warm. The smell alone seems to draw people toward the kitchen, though the cooks are quick to shoo away curious fingers before the bread reaches the hall. As the sun lowers outside, the hall is lit once more. Candles are set in their holders, the long tables covered in clean linen. Pewter dishes gleam faintly in the flickering light, and pitchers of ale and wine stand ready. The fire in the great hearth crackles, the flames dancing against the blackened stones. The household gathers, the lord and lady taking their places at the high table. The servants move smoothly, trained to read the subtle cues that govern the flow of the meal. A bowl of pottage is set before you, this one made from almond milk thickened with rice gently flavored with ginger. It is mild, soothing, and quietly rich. Alongside it comes a trencher of bread, its surface warm enough to release a little curl of steam when torn. Next comes the rabbit stew, its sauce thickened with breadcrumbs until it clings richly to the meat. The onions and leeks have melted into sweetness, the mustard lending a faint, sharp edge that wakes the palate. A spoonful over bread makes for a satisfying bite, the textures blending into a warm, savory comfort. The pie follows its crust, breaking open, to reveal the tender capon and sweet prunes inside. The contrast of flavors, the delicate meat, the earthy sweetness of the fruit. The spice in the seasoning speaks to a cook who understands balance as much as abundance. A little green salad dressed with oil and verjuice offers a bright counterpoint. The meal closes with the fruit plate slices of pear and apple, their edges brushed with honey, so they glisten in the candlelight. Beside them are a few preserved cherries, their syrup dark and rich. This is a gentle ending, a reminder that even the simplest flavors can be as pleasing as the rarest spice when chosen with care. The talk tonight is quieter than at the grand dinner. Perhaps it's the smaller company or the softer light of the hall, but the voices seem to blend more easily with the music from the corner. The fire's warmth fills the spaces between words, and you feel yourself leaning into the comfort of the moment. When the last plates are cleared, a basin of warm scented water is brought for washing the hands. The fragrance is light, maybe lavender this time, and the cloth offered afterward is soft against your fingers. The ritual marks the gentle winding down of the day's second feast. Some guests will remain to talk by the fire, sipping a little hippocras or mead. Others drift away toward their chambers, their footsteps fading into the quiet corridors. The candles burn lower, and the hall settles once again into its steady nighttime rhythm, awaiting the next day's cycle of preparation and plenty. In this slow dance of meals and moments, you see the pattern of noble life in the Middle Ages, each day bracketed by the table, each feast a thread woven into the larger tapestry of status, hospitality, and tradition. The dishes may change with the season, the company may shift with the tides of favor and alliance, but the rhythm, that steady, deliberate movement from abundance to rest, endures. And as you step back from tonight's supper, the scent of honeyed pears still lingering in your senses, you feel the weight of that rhythm settling into you as well, a quiet, steady heartbeat that carries you forward into the deepening night. The rhythm of noble dining does not live only in the day-to-day meals. It bends and swells with the turning of the year, marked by the great feasts that punctuate the calendar, Christmas, Easter feast days of patron saints, and the milestones of the household itself, weddings, births, the sealing of alliances. These occasions transform the steady luxury of daily life into something even grander, a display meant to impress not only those within the hall, but anyone who might hear of it afterward. You can almost feel the difference in the air in the days before such a celebration. The great hall is dressed more richly, its tapestries cleaned and rehung so their colors glow in the flickering candlelight. The trestle tables are rubbed to a deep sheen, their surfaces hidden beneath linens finer than usual, sometimes embroidered or edged with colored thread. Banners bearing the Lord's arms are unfurled from the beams overhead, and sprays of greenery or flowers, depending on the season, are placed in great jars to soften the stone walls. The kitchen becomes a hive of motion unlike anything on an ordinary day. Orders for extra meat, poultry, and fish have gone out weeks in advance. Spices are fetched from their locked chests in quantities that would make an ordinary cook gasp. The pastry cooks prepare elaborate subtleties, edible sculptures fashioned from marzipan sugar, and pastry destined to be admired as much as eaten. For a winter feast, the menu might include swan roasted whole, its feathers carefully replaced, to make it look as if it had stepped straight from the icy river to the table. There could be venison pies laced with cloves and cinnamon, their rich gravy thick enough to cling to a spoon. Bowls of dried fruit soaked in wine figs, raisins, dates, would stand alongside candied nuts gilded with fine sugar. And to drink strong hippocress, its warmth and spice driving out the cold. Summer brings its own kind of splendor. Fresh cherries, strawberries, and plums are arranged in great heaps, their bright colors gleaming in the sun that filters through open shutters. Cold dishes might appear poached salmon dressed with a sauce of herbs and vinegar, or pigeon in aspic set with edible flowers. There would be salads of tender greens sprinkled with violets or borage blossoms. Sweet custards flavored with rose water might follow, light enough to be served in delicate cups between heavier dishes. These great occasions are not only about the food, they are about the careful choreography of service. Each course is announced and carried in with ceremony. The Lord's carver and cupbearer move with studied grace, the servers arranging the dishes so that the richest and most impressive are placed nearest the high table. Musicians play between courses, sometimes joined by singers, or even small troops of players offering brief performances. You take a seat near the middle of the long board, the light from the candles catching in the polished pewter before you. The first dish arrives, a golden-crusted pie steam curling from the slits in its top. When it is cut, the scent of spiced meat and sweet fruit rises, wrapping around you in a warm cloud. The filling glistens, each piece of meat tender and richly flavored, the fruit softened into jewel-like morsels. Between these heavier dishes, subtleties arrive. One is a small sugar castle, its turrets dusted with gold, its windows painted with edible color. Another takes the form of a ship with almond paste sails set on a base of marchpane waves. These creations are admired, praised aloud, and sometimes sent along to honored guests to take home proof of the household's refinement and artistry. The drinks flow steadily, deep red wine mulled with cinnamon, pale ale, foaming gently in the cups. Honey mead sweet enough to linger on the lips. Now and then a server refills your goblet with rosewater-infused wine, its fragrance rising delicately as you lift it. The warmth of the drink seeps into you, a slow tide of comfort. One of the marvels of such a feast is the sheer variety of flavors in a single sitting. You might taste a slice of roast beef seasoned with nothing more than salt and rosemary, then turn to a dish of eels stewed in a sauce sharp with vinegar and sweetened with raisins. A spoonful of almond cream might follow, light and cooling, before a bite of spiced venison pie returns you to the deep, savory heart of the meal. The service is constant but unhurried. Between courses, basins of scented water are offered for the hands, the scent shifting with the season lavender, in summer rosemary in winter. The linen towels are warmed slightly, a small touch of comfort in the midst of grandeur. When the last course arrives, it is often a medley of sweetmeats and fruit wafers, crisp and thin, as parchment, candied citrus peel, glowing like amber dates stuffed with almond paste. Bowls of fresh fruit gleam in the candlelight. their colors deepened by the flicker of the flames. A few cups of spiced wine close the meal, their heat and fragrance lingering like the final notes of music. And then comes the slow winding down. The musicians shift to softer airs, the talk turns from merry boasting to quieter stories, the hall's warmth deepening as the candles burn lower. Some guests lean back, eyes half-lidded, lulled by food drink and the steady hum of conversation. Others slip away quietly, drawn to the fire-lit withdrawing rooms, where cordial drinks await. Even as the feast itself ends, the impression it leaves is lasting. In the days to come, people will speak of the sugar castle, the swan's gleaming feathers, the richness of the venison pie. Word will travel beyond the hall, reaching other households, shaping reputations. A well-executed feast is as much an act of diplomacy as any treaty, a declaration of power and generosity that lingers long after the last candle is snuffed. And so you sit there, the warmth of the meal settling over you, like a heavy cloak, the smells of spice and roasted meat fading slowly into the air. The hall glows in the last strength of the candles, the banners overhead stirring faintly in a draught. You can feel the centuries between this world and your own, but in the comfort of the moment, that distance seems small. Somewhere behind the hall in the cool dark of the storerooms, the next feast is already taking shape. The spices will be counted, the meat ordered, the sweetmeats planned. For in a noble household of the Middle Ages, abundance is not an accident. It is the work of every day woven into the fabric of life as tightly as the threads in the Lord's own banner. Not every season in a noble household is one of plenty, even for the rich. The year moves through rhythms of abundance and restraint. Winter, after the great feasts of Christmastide have faded, can settle into a quieter kind of eating. The storerooms are still full, but much of what they hold is preserved, salted, dried, or pickled. Fresh fruit is rare now, save for apples and pears kept carefully in cool storage. Herbs come from the dried bundles hanging in the kitchen rafters. The scents of cooking shift less the sharp brightness of fresh herbs, more the deep, slow perfume of spices and slow-roasted meats. This is the season when the wealthy lean on their skill in preservation and their connections to far-off trade. The larder's salted beef and pork appear more often cooked gently to soften the meat and paired with mustard or spiced sauces to disguise any heaviness from long storage. Dried peas and beans find their way into pottages thickened with breadcrumbs, sometimes enriched with almond milk or bits of bacon. The taste is hearty and grounding, the kind that lingers pleasantly in the stomach against the cold. For fish days, those many Fridays and religious fast days when meat is forbidden, the household turns to its supply of salted herring stockfish or barrels of pickled eel. These are soaked sometimes for hours to draw out the salt, then stewed with wine, onions, and spices until tender. Even in such plain-sounding fare, the wealthy find ways to elevate the dish: saffron for color, cloves for depth, a scattering of raisins for sweetness. Winter bread remains fine and white for those who can afford it. The manchet loaves emerge from the oven, with a delicate crust soft inside their warmth, a comfort in the chill of the hall. Sometimes on darker afternoons, these loaves are served with sweetened butter, the cream whipped and blended with sugar, a small indulgence that makes even the most ordinary winter day feel touched by luxury. The midday dinner in these leaner months still carries the shape of nobility, though it may be less ostentatious. A thick venison stew with parsnips and leeks might be served in deep bowls, the broth dark and fragrant. Roasted goose could take the place of the more extravagant swan, the skin crisped until golden, and served with a sauce of wine and sharp herbs. Baked apples hollowed and filled with honeyed almonds might appear toward the end, their scent filling the hall before they arrive at the table. And then there is the fire. In winter, the feast is as much about the hearth's heat as it is about the food. Guests draw their chairs closer, the high-backed seats sheltering them from drafts. The fire's glow turns the pewter dishes to silver, the silver cups to molten light. Outside, the world lies under frost, the air so still that sound carries far. Inside, the clink of a spoon against a trencher seems loud in the warm hush of the hall. As evening comes, the supper table offers a gentler spread. A pottage of rice cooked in almond milk sprinkled with cinnamon sugar may be the centerpiece. There might be small pies filled with minced meat and dried fruit, their crusts rich with butter. Pickled vegetables, cabbage, cucumber, or even preserved walnuts offer a sharp bite between the softer flavors. A little hippocras warms the blood before the night closes in. Even on these quieter days, the household maintains its rituals. Hands are washed before and after linen is folded, just so the dishes are served in a deliberate order. To abandon these would be to risk appearing careless or diminished, and in the world of the nobility, appearances are as vital as the meal itself. By contrast, spring is a time of gentle renewal in the noble kitchen. The first fresh herbs, sorrel chives, young parsley begin to appear, brightening the flavor of soups and sauces. Early lettuces and tender greens find their way to the table in small salads, often dressed with oil and verjuice. The kitchen gardens begin to stir, offering hints of the bounty to come. In these first warm weeks, fish and fowl take center stage. A plump roast chicken with a stuffing of fresh herbs might appear at dinner, or a baked trout scented with fennel and lemon. Eggs, plentiful now from the hens, are worked into custards, both sweet and savory. A simple dish of poached eggs with butter and pepper can feel as refreshing as any elaborate pie after the heavier meals of winter. With the longer days, fresh milk and butter become more abundant, and the flavor changes subtly from the rich, heavy taste of winter to something lighter and fresher. The wealthy make the most of it, churning butter more frequently, serving it with new loaves of bread still steaming from the oven. Cream might be whipped with sugar and served with the season's first strawberries, a sign that summer is only a breath away. The hall itself changes with the seasons. In winter, the shutters are drawn tight against the cold, the rushes thick on the floor. In spring, the shutters are thrown wide during the day, letting in air scented with damp earth and new growth. The tapestries still hang for beauty, but the hearth burns lower, the heat less fiercely needed. The light falls differently now, softer but brighter, catching the gleam of silver dishes in the middle of the day. The cycle of meals turns with the seasons, each bringing its own colors and flavors to the noble table. The wealthy do not eat as the poor do their access to preservation trade, and skilled cooks allows them variety even in the hardest months. But they too feel the ebb and flow of the year. The spring lamb is sweeter because it follows the salt meat of winter. The cherries are brighter because they have been missed for so many months. As evening deepens on a spring day, you might see a supper of poached salmon, with green herbs, fresh bread, with sweet butter, and a dish of custard brightened with rosewater. The air from the open shutters is cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of flowers from the garden. The candles are lit, not for warmth now, but for the gentle glow they give to the table, softening the lines of faces, making silver and pewter gleam in the growing dark. Here, too, the pace is unhurried. The Lord leans back in his chair, speaking softly with his steward. The lady smiles at a guest's story, her fingers resting lightly on the stem of her cup. The servants move with quiet assurance, refilling plates, offering fruit-folding cloths. Outside, a nightingale begins to sing somewhere beyond the walls, the notes threading faintly into the hall. And so the wealthy pass from one season to the next, their meals both a reflection of the year's turning and a constant assertion of their place in the world. Even in the lean months, the table speaks of abundance. In the bright months, it overflows. It is a rhythm as sure as the planting and harvest in the fields. But here in the great hall, it is measured in platters and cups, in spices and sauces, in the quiet satisfaction of a meal taken in comfort and security. Behind the elegance of a noble table lies the constant, unglamorous work of those who keep it running. The wealthy of the Middle Ages could eat in such abundance only because an entire network of skilled people labored often unseen to make it possible. Their world is not the candlelit hall, but the heat and bustle of the kitchen, the cool dimness of the storerooms, and the steady rhythm of daily preparation. At the center is the master cook, a figure of authority in his own right. He is not simply a man with a good hand for seasoning. He is a manager, a planner, a guardian of both taste and reputation. He knows the seasons, the market prices, the storage limits of every ingredient under his charge. He decides which dishes will appear on the table and in what order, balancing the need for variety with the limits of what the household can supply at any given moment. Beneath him, the kitchen is a carefully divided domain. There is the saucer responsible for the delicate sauces that accompany the roasts, a role requiring both skill and a sure hand with spice. The potager tends the soups and stews, coaxing flavor from bones, herbs, and grains in the great cauldrons. The pastry cook, often a specialist of great talent, shapes pies, tarts, and the intricate subtleties that delight guests between courses. The scullions, the lowest rank, scrub pots, carry water, sweep the floors, and fetch whatever is needed at a moment's notice. The workday begins early, long before the lord or lady stirs. Fires are lit in the great hearths, bread dough set to rise in the warm corners of the kitchen. A trip to the market may be necessary for fresh fish or poultry, though much of the household's supply comes from its own lands. The master cook inspects the larder, deciding whether the salted beef needs soaking or if a wheel of cheese is ripe enough to serve. Every dish begins with preparation, and in the Middle Ages, preparation is labor-intensive. Herbs must be plucked from their stems, washed and finely chopped. Almonds must be pounded into meal, then strained with water to make almond milk. Meat must be carved from the bone, sometimes aged or salted, then trimmed and seasoned. Without mechanical grinders or powered mixers, every step depends on hands, knives, and heavy mortars. The rhythmic pounding of pestles is a constant background sound echoing through the stone walls. The kitchen itself is a world of heat and motion. The hearth blazes with spits, turning slowly, one for a haunch of venison, another for a pair of roasting geese. Near the flames, a servant bastes the meat with a brush of herbs dipped in melted butter, the sizzling sound mingling with the occasional hiss of dripping fat on the coals. Large cauldrons hang from iron hooks, bubbling steadily. Inside, grains swell and meat softens into tender strands. The air is rich with overlapping aromas, roasting meat, fresh bread, baking in the oven herbs, bruised under the cook's knife. In one corner, the pastry cook works in comparative quiet, rolling out dough on a board dusted with fine flour. The dough is cut and shaped for small pies, each destined to hold a filling of spiced fruit or minced meat. Decorative edges are crimped carefully, for the appearance of a dish is nearly as important as its taste. The subtleties take longer, still a marzipan swan molded to perfection, or a sugar sculpture dusted with gold leaf set aside to harden before it can be carried proudly into the hall. Meanwhile, the storerooms are never left unattended. A pantry clerk checks off each jar and sack, noting what has been taken for the day's meals. Barrels are tapped for ale jars, unsealed for honey, or preserved fruit. The spice cabinet is unlocked only under the eye of a trusted servant, for its contents are worth their weight in silver. Saffron threads, cinnamon sticks, peppercorns. These are measured by the pinch, not the handful. Outside the kitchen, a separate team tends the dining hall. The tables are scrubbed and dried, then covered with linen. Pewter is polished to a high-shine goblets arranged neatly. Candles are trimmed so their wicks burn cleanly. The rushes on the floor are swept and replaced with fresh ones scented with herbs. Everything must be ready before the first guests appear. For the meal is not just sustenance, it is a performance of the household's grace and order. When the time for service comes, the kitchen bursts into one last flurry of motion. Dishes are arranged in order, each course lined up so it can be carried in at the right moment. Servants in livery lift heavy platters, balancing their loads carefully as they pass from the smoky heat of the kitchen into the bright warmth of the hall. The master cook stands at the threshold, checking each dish, adjusting a garnish, wiping a spill from the rim of a plate. Once in the hall, the service takes on its own rhythm. The carver steps forward to slice the roast for the high table, his movements as precise as a dancer's. The cupbearer refills goblets with wine or ale pouring steadily from silver ewers. Lesser dishes are placed along the table for other guests, the servants moving in practiced patterns that avoid crowding or confusion. The sound of voices rises as guests take their first bites, and the kitchen, for a brief moment, grows quieter, the work now in the hands of those who serve. Yet even as the feast unfolds, the kitchen continues to labor. Empty trenchers must be replaced, sauces kept warm, bread baskets refilled. The next course is always waiting in the wings, ready to take the stage. When one dish leaves the kitchen, another takes its place until the last of the meal is finally served. And then comes the clearing, a task as important as the serving. Platters are returned to the kitchen, where any uneaten meat is carved and set aside for later meals. Bones are saved for stock crumbs, swept into bins for animal feed. The hearth is banked, the ovens left to cool. The great table in the kitchen, once crowded with bowls and boards, is wiped clean, the day's tools washed and set to dry. For the servants, the day is far from over. They will take their own meal now, plainer drawn from the remains of the feast, and then set about preparing for tomorrow. The rhythm never truly stops. It simply shifts from the public display of the hall to the quiet industry of planning. For the lord and lady, the kitchen's work is invisible, yet it is the foundation of their daily life. Every warm loaf, every perfectly roasted bird, every gleaming sugar sculpture rests on hours of unseen labor. And in the great houses of the Middle Ages, that labor is as constant as the turning of the seasons. Even now, as you step back from the kitchen's heat and into the cooler air of the hall, the smell of roasting meat still clings to you, the warmth lingering on your skin. You can almost hear the steady heartbeat of the household in the clatter of pots, the scrape of knives on boards, the shuffle of feet across the flagstones. The feast is over for today, but the work of making it possible has already begun again. If the kitchen is the beating heart of the noble household, then trade is its lifeblood. The wealth and variety of the noble table in the Middle Ages depend not only on the fields and forests of the estate, but on the invisible web of merchants' ships, caravans, and markets stretching far beyond the castle walls. Every pinch of cinnamon, every thread of saffron, every measure of sugar tells a story of distant lands and dangerous journeys. The most prized ingredients travel furthest. Spices come from the East cinnamon from Sri Lanka, cloves from the Moluccas, nutmeg from the Banda Islands. These pass through the hands of Arab traders, Venetian merchants, and continental middlemen before they ever reach the storerooms of a northern European lord. Saffron has grown closer to home in some regions, but the finest comes from Mediterranean climates, carried overland in tightly sealed packets to preserve its color and fragrance. Pepper, though more common, is still costly. Its warm bite is a mark of sophistication when dusted over a roast or worked into a sauce. Sugar is a marvel in itself. It is not yet the everyday sweetener you know. In the Middle Ages, it is a spice rare and precious, imported from cane plantations in Cyprus, Sicily, or the Levant. It arrives in solid cones, wrapped and sealed, and must be broken, grated, and pounded before it can be used. In the noble kitchen, sugar transforms sauces, sweetens custards, and glazes subtleties into edible jewels. Even common foods take on new meaning when imported. Almonds essential for almond milk and marchpane travel from warmer climates like Spain or North Africa. Raisins, figs, and dates are sun-dried in distant orchards before making their way to noble tables. Rice grown in the Mediterranean is carried by ship and mule across half a continent before it is boiled gently with almond milk for a soft, pale pudding. The noble household does not rely entirely on merchants appearing at the castle gates. Instead, the lord maintains relationships with specific suppliers, sometimes for generations. Trusted spice merchants in a port city may receive letters ordering the next shipment months in advance. Wine is purchased in cask from favored vineyards, sometimes even from estates owned outright by the family. Wool from the household's own flocks might be traded directly for luxury goods, bypassing coin altogether. Seasonal fairs are another opportunity to stock the storerooms. These great gatherings draw merchants from far and wide, filling the market squares with bright awnings and the scents of goods both familiar and exotic. A steward walking through such a fair might pass stalls of salted fish, barrels of olives, wheels of cheese fragrant with age, and bolts of fine cloth, but it is the spice stalls that command the most attention. Small wooden boxes, each holding a treasured ginger, cardamom, galangal mace. The prices are high, the bargaining slow and careful. In the castle, the arrival of imported goods is a small event in itself. Barrels are rolled into storerooms, sealed packets placed in locked cupboards. The master cook examines each spice for freshness, the bright gold of saffron, the sharp scent of peppercorns, the sweetness of cinnamon. He knows these flavors will carry the table through months of meals, lifting even the simplest dish into the realm of the extraordinary. For the wealthy, imported luxuries do more than please the palate. They proclaim status. To serve a pie scented with cloves is to say without words that you have the means to reach across the known world for your ingredients. To pour a cup of wine sweetened with sugar is to remind your guests that what is rare for them is every day for you. Even the display of whole spices in their raw form, cinnamon sticks, nutmeg, still in its shell, can be part of the spectacle shown to guests as a kind of edible treasure. Yet the noble table is not made entirely of imports. The local bounty matters too, and the wealthy know how to showcase it. Fresh game from the Lord's hunting preserves, fish from nearby rivers, vegetables from the manor gardens. All these are essential, and their quality reflects the skill of the household in managing its lands. A trout caught in the castle's own stream, poached with imported pepper and saffron, carries a layered meaning. It speaks of both local control and far-flung reach. The blending of the local and the distant is what gives noble dining its character. A common cook might roast a chicken with sage. The noble kitchen roasts it with sage, dresses it with a sauce of almond milk and sugar, and dusts it with cinnamon before sending it to table. The base is familiar. The embellishment is the mark of wealth. These luxuries require careful storage. The spice cupboard is kept dry and cool, the sugar cones wrapped against damp. Wine is stored in the cellar, where the temperature holds steady year-round. Barrels of preserved fish are kept in a separate cool chamber, away from strong-smelling herbs and spices. The steward knows the exact location of every item, the quantity remaining, and the date it should be used. This order is not mere fussiness. It is the invisible scaffolding that allows the noble table to maintain its rhythm through all seasons. The guests who dine here may never see the spice cupboard or the cellars. They will not know how many days a shipment of almonds traveled, or how many hands passed the raisins from one port to another. But they will taste it in the food, and they will understand what it means. The flavors will carry the weight of distance, the suggestion of a world larger than the hall, a world that the lord and lady command through coin trade and influence. As you sit at the table tearing a piece of soft bread to dip into a sauce fragrant with saffron and cinnamon, you are tasting centuries of trade and centuries of human effort. The warmth of the spice is not just culinary, it is political, economic, and social all at once. It is the taste of reach, of connection, of the long arm of wealth stretching across oceans and deserts to bring comfort to this single candlelit room. And when the dishes are cleared and the final cup of spiced wine sipped, that reach remains in the storerooms below, in the letters carried by messengers to far-off ports, in the quiet calculations of the steward and master cook. The feast is only the visible tip of the work that never ends, the constant weaving together of the near and the far to sustain the noble table's endless dance of abundance. If the wealth of the noble table is built on the reach of trade and the skill of the kitchen, its meaning is shaped in large part by the rules written and unwritten that govern how it is enjoyed. In the Middle Ages, dining among the rich is not only about eating, it is about performing your place in the world. Every gesture, every bite, every exchange across the table is steeped in etiquette that reinforces the order of society. From the moment a guest enters the hall, they are bound by these expectations. Seating is the most obvious sign of rank. The closer you are to the high table, the greater your status. The lord and lady sit in the place of honor, often slightly elevated, so they are visible to all. Their nearest seats are reserved for the most important guests visiting nobles, powerful allies, or kin, whose standing in the family warrants the distinction. Farther down the table sit lesser guests, and beyond them, retainers or favored servants. The seating itself communicates the invisible map of favor and hierarchy. The meal begins with the washing of hands, a ritual as symbolic as it is practical. A servant approaches with a basin and ewer, pouring scented water over each guest's fingers. Another offers a fresh linen towel. Clean hands are not merely about hygiene. They mark a readiness to join the company of the table, a small act that says, "I belong here." Once seated, the rules of conduct are subtle but strict. You do not reach across another person's trencher for food. You take what is offered to you by a servant or by the person sharing your platter. For in the Middle Ages, even the wealthy often share dishes 2, sometimes 3 diners to a plate or bowl, and the ability to do so gracefully is a mark of refinement. Conversation is an art in itself. Loud boasting, bawdy jokes, or coarse language are frowned upon at the high table. Stories should flatter the host, amuse the company, or share news without descending into gossip. Compliments to the cook, expressed through the host, are welcome. Complaints about the food are not. Laughter has its place, but so does quiet attentiveness when the Lord speaks. The handling of food is another area where etiquette speaks volumes. Meat is often carved by the appointed carver, not hacked apart by the diners themselves. If you must cut your own portion, it should be done neatly with your knife kept sharp and clean. Bread is torn with the fingers, not bitten from a whole piece. Sauces are dipped into lightly without drenching the bread or spilling onto the table. Even drinking has its rules. The goblet is not raised too high, nor drained in a single gulp unless in a formal toast. You might offer your cup to a neighbor to drink from as a gesture of camaraderie, but the offer must be accepted graciously and the cup returned promptly. Spilling, especially at the high table, is an embarrassment not only for you, but for the servants who must clean it. The role of the servants themselves is bound up in this choreography. They move in and out of the diner's space with practiced ease, pouring wine, replacing trenchers, offering platters. A guest is expected to acknowledge their service, a nod, a word of thanks without treating them as equals. To be overly familiar with the servants is seen as lowering oneself. To ignore them entirely is seen as arrogance. There are too the subtleties of refusing food. To decline a dish outright can be interpreted as a slight to the host. If you must refuse, perhaps for reasons of health or taste, you do so politely, often with a word of admiration for its appearance or preparation. Accepting at least a token portion is the safest course. Special dishes carry their own expectations. When a subtlety, one of those elaborate sugar or pastry creations, is presented, it is first admired aloud. Guests might comment on its craftsmanship, its cleverness, or the skill of the cook. Only after this small ritual is it cut or shared. The act of praise reinforces the host's generosity and the artistry of the household. Music and entertainment are interwoven with the meal, and even here etiquette plays a role. If minstrels perform, it is polite to listen, to nod in time with the music, perhaps to exchange a few appreciative words with your table companions. To talk loudly over the performance is considered uncouth. When a storyteller spins a tale, attention should be paid, even if the story is familiar, for in the giving of attention, you honor the effort and skill of the performer. At the close of the meal, the washing of hands returns, this time marking not readiness, but completion. The scented water rinses away the traces of the feast. The clean hands are a sign that the formal part of the gathering is over. A prayer or blessing may follow, giving thanks for the meal and the company. Only after this are guests free to rise from the table. These rituals are not mere decoration. They are the invisible threads that hold the world of the noble table together. They remind each person of their place, they smooth the flow of the meal, and they transform eating from a private act of survival into a shared act of culture. Without them, the wealth of the table would lose much of its meaning. For a guest unfamiliar with these customs, the experience could be daunting. One misstep, sitting in the wrong place, taking food before it is offered, speaking out of turn, could mark you as unrefined, perhaps even disrespectful. But for those who grow up in this world, the rules are second nature, as much a part of dining as the bread and wine. And for the lord and lady, observing these customs is as much a duty as an enjoyment. In their adherence to the forms, they show respect for tradition and for the company they keep. The noble table is both a place of pleasure and a stage for the performance of power. And in this performance, etiquette is the script. So when you sit at the high-backed chair near the upper table, and the servant pours a thin stream of rose-scented water over your hands, you are not just preparing to eat. You are stepping into a role that has been played for centuries, guest participant, witness to the order and beauty of the medieval feast. The bread, you break the cup, you raise the words you speak, all are part of a larger pattern woven as tightly as the tapestry on the wall behind you. In a noble household of the Middle Ages, the table is more than a place to eat, it is a political stage. Every meal, whether a modest supper or a grand feast, is an opportunity to display power, forge alliances, and reinforce the web of relationships that sustains a lord's position. Hospitality is not simply a courtesy. It is a currency, and the noble table is where it is most visibly spent. When guests are invited, the list is rarely casual. Who is seated where, and even whether they are invited at all, sends a message. A neighboring lord placed near the high table knows his standing is secure. A rival seated further down understands that his influence is waning. Merchants who supply the household may be honored with a better seat as a sign of ongoing favor, or kept at the lower board if their relationship is purely transactional. Every placement carries meaning. The food itself can be a signal. Serving a dish prepared with expensive imports, a roast dressed in saffron sauce, or a custard sweetened with sugar, tells guests that the household has both wealth and reach. Offering game taken from the Lord's own hunting preserves emphasizes control over the land and its resources. Presenting subtleties in the shape of heraldic beasts or family emblems quietly reminds everyone of lineage and prestige. The act of sharing food is also political. In many settings, dishes are served to 2 or 3 people together. Sharing a platter with someone is a statement. It can imply friendship, alliance, or at least cordial relations. Refusing to share or ensuring that certain people do not share is equally deliberate. Gifts of food extend the table's influence beyond the hall itself. It is not uncommon for a lord to send part of a feast, a joint of venison, a gilded marchpane, a cask of spiced wine to a neighboring household, as a gesture of goodwill, or as a reminder of bonds between families. These gifts carry the scent of the feast with them, a tangible sign of generosity and wealth that will be remembered long after the meat is eaten and the wine drunk. Feasts held on special occasions, weddings, the knighting of a young noble, the visit of an important ally, become part of the shared memory between households. Guests will speak of the swan presented in full plumage of the sugar castle that stood in the center of the table, of the songs sung by the minstrels after the meal. These details are retold like stories, each time reinforcing the reputation of the host. The presence of high-ranking guests can also be a kind of silent endorsement. When a powerful neighbor accepts an invitation and sits at your table, it is a public acknowledgement of connection. Others in the hall will take note, and so will those who hear of it afterward. The table becomes a place where alliances are seen as much as they are negotiated. Sometimes the politics are quieter still. An invitation extended and accepted can smooth over old grievances. A seat given in honor can encourage a wavering ally to remain loyal. A dish prepared to suit a guest's taste can signal personal attention and favor. In a world where reputation is everything, these gestures are not trivial. They are tools of governance. Hospitality also binds the noble household to its retainers and servants. The great feast days are not reserved solely for the elite. On certain occasions, all who serve the household may share in a more generous meal. A goose at Christmas for the steward's table, sweetened ale for the grooms in the stable. Such gestures strengthen loyalty, reminding every member of the household that they are part of its prosperity. The role of the lady of the house in this web of hospitality is significant. She may oversee the seating, ensure that honored guests are well attended, and personally welcome those whose presence she wishes to value. In some cases, she may even walk the hall during the meal, speaking briefly to each table, a visible sign of her engagement and her influence. Entertainment is another part of the political language of the table. Minstrels may sing ballads that subtly flatter the host's lineage. Dancers or acrobats may perform between courses, adding to the sense of occasion. A jester's humor may be aimed gently or sharply at certain guests, depending on the host's intent. The choice of entertainment, like the choice of food, speaks to the tone and purpose of the gathering. Even the departure of guests is managed with care. A noble host will not simply let people drift away. Instead, farewells are made formally. Sometimes small tokens are given: a bundle of sweetmeats, a flask of spiced wine, a decorated trencher, as a reminder of the evening. These tokens travel back with the guests, carrying the hall's generosity into other homes. And beyond the visible politics lies the unspoken rule: the noble table must never appear meager. To host with insufficient abundance would be to risk whispers of poverty or mismanagement. Even in lean times, the illusion of plenty must be maintained. This may mean fewer courses, but more lavish presentation or smaller portions of the most luxurious ingredients served with flourish. The point is not just to feed, it is to impress. For the guests, participating in such a meal is both privilege and obligation. One must eat appreciatively, praise sincerely, and respond to the host's gestures in kind. A guest who fails to meet these expectations risks not only personal embarrassment, but a strain on the relationship between households. Thus, every cup poured, every trencher set down, every seat offered, is part of a complex dance of generosity and power. The noble table feeds the body, yes, but more importantly, it nourishes the bonds that keep a lord's influence alive. The feast is not an interruption of politics. It is politics conducted in the language of bread and wine, spice and song. And so, as you imagine yourself seated halfway down the long board, the firelight glancing off the silver dishes, you might realize that you are not merely a witness to a meal. You are inside a living negotiation, one where every bite, every glance, every word is shaping the fortunes of the household. The flavors on your tongue are seasoned with more than spice. They are seasoned with centuries of practice in the art of hospitality as power. Not every meal in a noble household takes place in the great hall beneath banners and tapestries. For all its grandeur, the public feast is only one side of the noble dining world. There is another quieter realm, the private meals taken in smaller chambers, away from the eyes of most guests and the theater of politics. Here the pace is slower, the company smaller, and the atmosphere more intimate. These private meals might be held in the solar, a warm upper-floor chamber that catches the day's best light. The solar is less formal than the hall, with carpets or thick rugs on the floor, cushions on benches, and a smaller hearth whose fire glows gently rather than roars. Windows look out over the gardens or the courtyard, their shutters open in fair weather to let in soft air. Here the noble family might dine with only their closest companions, trusted retainers, favored guests, or visiting kin. The table in the solar is smaller, often round or oval, making conversation easier. There is no high table set apart from the rest. Instead, the seating arrangement is based on comfort and familiarity rather than strict hierarchy. Candles are still lit, linen still covers the board, and pewter or silver dishes are still used, but the air is less ceremonious. The food in these settings may be just as fine as in the hall, but it is chosen for pleasure rather than display. A gently poached fish with a green herb sauce, a roasted capon with lemon and parsley, or a pottage of rice with almond milk might appear. There could be fresh bread with sweet butter, soft cheese, and a plate of early fruit if the season allows. Sweet pastries might follow, or a custard flavored with nutmeg and cinnamon. The spices are still there, the imported delicacies still present. But the presentation is not meant to dazzle an audience, only to please the table. Conversation flows differently here. In the hall, the host must divide attention among many guests, maintain the rhythm of the feast, and ensure no one is neglected. In the solar, the talk can wander more freely into personal stories, shared memories, private matters of estate or family. Laughter can be warmer pauses, more comfortable. Even the servants behave differently. In the great hall, their movements are a performance part of the choreography of the feast. Here they come and go quietly, pouring wine, setting down dishes, clearing plates, without the need for formal announcements. They are still attentive, perhaps more so given the smaller scale, but their presence is more discreet. Sometimes these private meals serve as a retreat after the demands of a grand feast. The lord and lady might invite a few chosen guests to join them in the solar for a final cup of hippocras or mead, along with small dishes of sweetmeats, marchpane cut into diamonds, candied orange peel, preserved cherries. The talk might drift to the day's events, the politics behind the seating arrangements, or the qualities of a new dish served at dinner. On other occasions, the private meal is simply the family's daily supper. The children are present, perhaps learning the habits of polite dining in a gentler environment than the hall. The lady might take the opportunity to observe their manners, correcting a grip on a knife, or reminding them to thank the servant who pours their drink. In this way, the customs of the noble table are passed down quietly, long before a young heir takes his place at the high table before the whole household. The menu for such a family supper might be modest by noble standards: a roasted chicken, a pottage of leeks and herbs, bread with fresh butter, and a simple tart filled with apples or pears. There might be a light ale or diluted wine for the adults, milk, or small beer for the children. It is still a richer meal than most in the realm will see, but its pleasure lies in its ease rather than its extravagance. In the winter months, the solar's hearth becomes the true center of the meal. The fire's warmth makes the room a refuge from the chill stone corridors. Shadows play gently on the walls, the air scented faintly with rosemary or lavender laid on the embers. In summer, the windows are thrown open to the evening air, the sound of birdsong, or the rustle of leaves drifting in with the cooler breeze. A private meal also allows for tastes that might not suit a larger gathering. If the lady prefers a particular pastry or the lord has a fondness for a certain herb, the cook can indulge these preferences more readily here. Exotic fruits brought in by a merchant might be reserved for these small gatherings, savored without the need to share them among dozens of guests. These meals are not without their own kind of significance. While the public feast projects the power of the household outward, the private meal strengthens its bonds inward. It is in the solar over a quiet supper that family ties are renewed. Trusted retainers are reassured and loyal friends are drawn closer. Decisions about the estate may be made here in the ease of familiar company, their weight softened by the comfort of shared bread and wine. For a guest invited into such intimacy, the honor is considerable. It is a sign of trust, a mark that you are welcome not only to the showpiece of the great hall, but to the hearth and table of the family itself. To eat here is to step inside the inner circle of the household, to see it not as a spectacle, but as a living, breathing home. And yet even here, the echo of the noble table's rules remains. Hands are still washed, dishes still served in their order, and gratitude still expressed. The smaller scale does not erase the centuries-old framework of etiquette. It simply softens it, making it feel more like habit than performance. As the meal in the solar draws to a close, the candles burn lower. The last cups of wine are sipped slowly, the final sweetmeats taken from their dishes. The servants clear the table quietly. The fire sinks to a bed of glowing embers. Conversation lingers in the warm air until the moment comes when even here in this most private of settings, the household begins to drift toward rest. And so whether in the echoing grandeur of the great hall or the soft-lit quiet of the solar, the noble table is always a place of meaning. It holds the rhythms of power and intimacy, the public show and the private hearth, woven together into the fabric of daily life. Both faces of this world, the grand and the personal, are necessary, each giving the other its full shape. Without the hall, the solar would seem small. Without the solar, the hall would seem hollow. Together, they form the complete life of the medieval noble's table. The noble table in all its forms is more than a place to eat. It is the steady heartbeat of the household. From the thunderous clamor of a feast in the great hall to the gentle murmur of a private supper in the solar, it marks the passage of each day and each season. For the wealthy of the Middle Ages, life is strung together in a chain of meals, each one a thread in the tapestry of their existence. The mornings begin with the quiet ritual of bread butter and perhaps a little cheese or honey. The midday dinner is the day's anchor, not hurried, not casual, but a deliberate moment when the household gathers in the light of the hall. The evening supper closes the rhythm, a softer echo of dinner, easing the household into the long hours of night. In between come the great feasts, those luminous points on the calendar, when the table becomes a stage, the meal an act of pageantry that lingers in memory. Within this rhythm lies the slow pulse of the seasons. Winter with its preserved meats and spiced wines taken close to the fire. Spring offering tender greens and the first fresh fish. Summer with fruit piled high on platters and cooling dishes of custard and jelly. Autumn heavy with roasts and rich pies, the flavors deep and earthy. The noble table shifts with these changes, not out of necessity, for the rich can afford variety year-round, but because the year itself is a story, and the table follows its chapters. And always there is the undercurrent of display. Even the simplest of meals is served with the small flourishes that say, "This is no common board linen cloths, smoothed by careful hands, pewter gleaming in the light, bread soft and white wine poured in cups of metal rather than wood." Guests notice these things even when they do not speak of them. The table is a language in which wealth and refinement are spoken fluently. For those who live within this world, the customs become second nature. A lord does not think twice about the proper place for a guest of equal rank. A lady instinctively knows which cup is set before an honored visitor. Servants learn the rhythm of service until it is as natural as breathing, when to pour, when to clear, when to stand at attention, and when to melt back into the shadows. The table is as choreographed as a courtly dance, each step performed without the need for conscious thought. This choreography does more than keep order. It creates a sense of belonging. The familiar gestures, the repeated phrases, the steady flow of service, all remind the members of the household who they are and where they stand. For the Lord, it is a reaffirmation of his authority. For the lady, of her influence. For the guests, of their place in the social web. Even the servants in their precise roles take part in the shared identity of the household. Over time, the noble table weaves itself into memory. A child raised here will recall the scent of warm bread and rosemary in the hall, the flicker of candlelight on silver, the way the music seemed to rise just as the main course was served. A guest will remember the taste of a rare, spiced wine, the delicate sweetness of marchpane, the sound of laughter mingling with the lute. These impressions, carried away, become part of the household's reputation, the intangible wealth that extends far beyond land or coin. In this way, the table is also a bridge between generations. The heir learns from watching the lord host guests the lady arrange. Seating, the servants move in harmony. When his time comes to preside over the hall, he will already know how to welcome a visiting knight, how to signal the carver, how to end the meal with grace. The customs are not written down. They are learned in the doing, passed along like the family's coat of arms or its most treasured silver. And when the day's last meal has been taken, the noble table does not truly rest. In the kitchen, servants prepare the bread for tomorrow's salt, the meat for the coming week, set aside the spices for the next great dinner. The hall itself stands empty, but for the faint scent of rosemary in the rushes and the cool gleam of the pewter in the candlelight. The stillness is temporary, a pause between one act and the next. There is a kind of comfort in this constancy. For all the changes in the world beyond the castle walls, wars fought, alliances made, and broken fortunes rising and falling, the noble table remains. It gathers people, it marks time, it holds the household together. It is both a mirror of the world outside and a refuge from it, a place where the business of survival is transformed into an art. As you sit once more at the edge of the great hall in your mind, the fire burning steadily, the banners shifting faintly overhead, you can feel the weight of centuries in the way the table is set, in the order of the courses, in the quiet authority with which the meal unfolds. You understand now that the food itself, rich as it is only part of the story. The rest is in the ritual, the memory, the meaning carried in every gesture. And so, as the final candles are snuffed and the echoes of the day fade into the stone, the noble table slips into darkness, not as an ending, but as a rest before the next rising of the sun. When once again bread will be broken, cups raised, and the steady heartbeat of the household will begin anew. The hall is quiet now. The fire has sunk to a deep glowing bed of embers, their soft red light breathing gently in the hearth. The candles are gone and the shadows have folded themselves into the corners, heavy and still. The scent of the feast lingers faintly, a trace of spice, a whisper of bread, the distant ghost of roasted meat, but it has faded into something calm like a memory slipping into dream. Outside, the night wraps close around the castle walls. The air is cool and deep, carrying the muffled sound of an owl somewhere far off. The courtyard lies under a quiet wash of moonlight, the cobblestones pale and smooth. The garden rests too, the rosemary and thyme holding their scent until morning. Somewhere in the kitchens, the last of the embers are being covered, the heavy pots stacked neatly for tomorrow. The servants have gone to their narrow beds, the clatter and bustle of the day tucked away with them. In the stables, the horses shift and sigh in their sleep. The dogs dream by the door paws, twitching in silence. In the private chambers, above the lord and lady sleep beneath heavy quilts, their breathing slow and even. The tapestries on the walls sway just a little in the night's breath through the shutters. The house itself seems to rest, the timbers and stones settling with small, contented creaks. And you too can rest now. Let the warmth of the hall linger in you, the glow of the fire, the soft weight of the feast, the steady rhythm of voices fading into quiet. Let it all drift away, carrying you deeper into the stillness, until the great hall, the banners, the bread and wine dissolve into the gentle dark.